Red Bull just ran a secret test, and what Verstappen discovered inside that RB22 could explain a performance loss of almost half a second per lap. No announcement. No cameras. No official data. But something leaked. A car that started the season incomplete, suddenly running parts every other team had from race 1. And that should never happen in Formula 1. Because when a team like Red Bull starts fixing fundamental design elements mid-season, it means something went seriously wrong. Right now, they are not chasing speed. They are trying to recover a car that has been unpredictable, unstable, and impossible to fully trust. And inside those emergency upgrades, there is one hidden change. The one Verstappen felt immediately. The one that could either bring Red Bull back to the front, or confirm that the RB22 was compromised from the very beginning. At first, nothing about that test looked unusual. Just another car on track. Just another controlled run. Just another quiet session behind closed doors. But inside the garage, everything felt different. Because Red Bull was not testing for performance. They were searching for answers. And Verstappen knew it. From the very first laps, something stood out. Not speed. Not lap time. Feeling. The way the car reacted mid-corner. The way the rear behaved under load. The way confidence either returned or disappeared. And that is where the real story begins. Because what Verstappen felt was not a small improvement. It was a change in behavior. Subtle, but critical. The front end responding differently. The airflow more controlled, at least in certain phases. Moments where the car finally felt predictable. But then, other moments where it did not. And that inconsistency is exactly what Red Bull has been fighting since the start of the season. Because this is not a car that is simply slow. This is a car that cannot be trusted. And in Formula 1, trust is everything. Without it, drivers cannot push. Without it, engineers cannot rely on data. Without it, performance becomes random. That is why the changes tested at Silverstone were so specific. New aerodynamic elements on the front wing, finally added after being missing early in the season. Adjustments to airflow direction, trying to stabilize turbulence around the front tires. Small corrections aimed at restoring balance. But here is the key detail. Those changes were not designed to make the car faster. They were designed to make it understandable. And that tells you everything about the situation. Because when a team like Red Bull focuses on understanding the car, instead of maximizing it, it means something deeper is wrong. And Verstappen felt that immediately. Moments of improvement, followed by moments of doubt. A car that almost works, but not completely. And that is far more dangerous than a car that simply lacks pace. Because it creates false signals. It makes you think the solution is close, when it might not be. And that is exactly what makes this situation so tense inside Red Bull. Because after Silverstone, they have data. They have feedback. They have direction. But they still do not have certainty. And without certainty, every next step becomes a risk. But here is where everything connects to something much bigger. Because what Verstappen experienced in those laps is directly linked to a part of the car that was not visible that day. The part that defines everything. The part that could either confirm progress or reveal that the real problem is still untouched. That hidden part is the floor. And this is where everything becomes clear. Because in modern Formula 1, the floor is not just another component. It is the foundation. It controls how air flows under the car. It generates most of the downforce. It defines whether the car feels stable or completely unpredictable. And right now, that is exactly where Red Bull's biggest problem exists. From the outside, the RB22 looks aggressive. Tight packaging. Narrow side pods. Everything pushed to the limit. But underneath, the airflow is not behaving the way it should. It is inconsistent. One lap it works. The next, it does not. And that is exactly what Verstappen felt at Silverstone. Moments where the car suddenly came alive. Moments where it felt planted, controlled, predictable. And then, without warning, that feeling disappeared. The rear becomes unstable. The balance shifts. Confidence drops instantly. And that is the worst scenario for any driver. Because performance in Formula One is not just about speed. It is about trust. If you cannot trust the car, you cannot push it. And if you cannot push it, you are already losing time. This is why the Silverstone test was so important. Because those laps were not about chasing lap times. They were about answering one question. Is the floor finally working, or is it still unstable? And the answer was not simple. There were signs of improvement. Cleaner airflow in certain phases. Better front-end response. More predictable entry into corners. But it was not consistent. And inconsistency is the real problem. Because it means the concept itself is still not fully understood. And that leads to something even more serious. Because if the floor concept is not working properly, then every other upgrade becomes limited. You can improve the front wing. You can reduce weight. You can fix cooling. But if the airflow under the car is unstable, you will never unlock full performance. Now here is where another issue connects directly to this. Cooling. Because the tighter the design, the harder it is to manage heat. And the RB22 is extremely tight. That creates pressure on the entire system. Temperatures rise. Efficiency drops. Performance has to be limited just to keep everything under control. There were already moments where the car could not be pushed fully. Where Verstappen had to hold back, not because of grip, but because of reliability concerns. And that changes everything. Because now, the problem is not just performance. It is stability and survival. So when you combine everything, an unstable floor, a sensitive aerodynamic balance, cooling limitations, weight issues, you are not looking at a simple upgrade situation. You are looking at a car that is fighting itself. And what Red Bull tested at Silverstone was not just a step forward. It was an attempt to stabilize the entire system. But here is the uncomfortable reality. If the foundation is not correct, no upgrade will fully fix it. It will improve things. It will make the car better. But it will never make it dominant. And that leads to the most important question of all. Why did Red Bull choose this concept in the first place? Because once you understand that decision, everything Verstappen felt at Silverstone, everything the team is trying to fix, everything happening right now, starts to make perfect sense. The answer begins long before Silverstone. Long before the first race. Long before the first problem appeared on track. It begins with a decision. At the end of last season, Red Bull had a choice. Shift focus early to the new RB22. Or keep pushing the previous car, chasing one more championship. They chose to keep fighting. They delayed the transition. They extended development. They stayed focused on winning, instead of preparing. And in Formula One, that choice has consequences. Because while Red Bull was still extracting performance from the past, other teams were already building the future. They had more time to design. More time to test concepts. More time to understand the new regulations. By the time Red Bull fully committed to the RB22, they were already behind in the most important phase. Concept definition. That moment where you decide how the entire car will behave. And once that is locked in, you cannot go back. You can only adjust around it. That is why everything we are seeing now is happening all at once. The weight issue. The aerodynamic imbalance. The cooling limitations. The unstable floor. This is not coincidence. This is what happens when a car is built under pressure. When decisions are made faster than they should be. When there is no time to fully validate the concept. And that is exactly what happened with the RB22. It was not a slow, refined evolution. It was a compressed project. And when a project is compressed, problems do not appear one by one. They appear together. That is why Verstappen's feedback at Silverstone felt so mixed. Moments where the car improves. Moments where it still feels wrong. Because Red Bull is not just developing performance. They are trying to correct the foundation. And that is one of the hardest things to do in Formula One. You can change the front wing. You can reduce weight. You can adjust airflow. But changing the core concept during the season always comes with risk. Every fix creates a new compromise. Every improvement introduces a new weakness. And Red Bull is now balancing all of that at the same time. But here is where the situation becomes even more intense. Because they are not alone. While they are trying to fix a flawed concept, other teams are moving forward without that burden. They are improving performance, not correcting mistakes. Which means Red Bull is fighting two battles at once. Fixing their own car. And chasing rivals who are already ahead. That is why everything now leads to one moment. Miami. That is not just another race. That is the deadline. The moment where everything tested at Silverstone. Everything Verstappen felt. Everything the team is changed. Has to work. Because if it does, Red Bull comes back. The car becomes predictable. The performance returns. The fight is alive again. But if it does not, then the truth becomes impossible to ignore. This is not just a difficult start. This is a limitation built into the RB22 from the very beginning. And everything that happened at Silverstone was not the solution. It was the moment Red Bull realized how deep the problem really goes. And this is where everything finally comes together. Because there is a moment in every Formula One season where a team stops asking how to go faster and starts asking a much more uncomfortable question. Can this car actually be fixed? Red Bull is at that moment. You can see it in the way they approached Silverstone. Not chasing lap time. Not showing performance. Just searching for something much more basic. Control. Because without control, nothing else matters. And what Verstappen revealed from that test points to something very clear. The RB22 is not just difficult. It is on the edge. The edge between a car that can be developed and a car that has already reached its limit. And that line is incredibly thin. Because if you are still on the right side of it, every upgrade brings you closer to the front. But if you cross it, every upgrade becomes smaller, less effective, more risky. And that is exactly the feeling inside Red Bull right now. Some improvements are there. You can see it in the data. You can feel it in certain corners. But it is not enough. Not consistent. Not reliable. Not something a driver can fully trust. And that is the key. Because in Formula One, the final tenths do not come from parts. They come from confidence. From a driver pushing without hesitation. From knowing exactly what the car will do before it does it. And right now, that confidence is not fully there. Not even for Verstappen. Which brings everything to Miami. Not as another race, but as a decision point. Because the car that arrives there is the real RB22. Not the version from the first races. Not the incomplete version. The corrected version. The version shaped by everything that happened at Silverstone. And it has to deliver. If it does, everything changes. The narrative shifts. The momentum returns. Red Bull becomes dangerous again. But if it does not, then what Verstappen revealed becomes the final piece of the puzzle. Because it confirms something far more serious than a slow start. It confirms that the RB22 was never fully right. That the problems were built into its foundation. And that no matter how many upgrades you bring, you cannot completely escape that. And that is why Silverstone was never just a hidden test. It was the moment of truth. The moment where Red Bull stopped guessing and started confronting reality. A reality that Miami will finally expose.